Okay, awesome. So thank you everyone for joining today. So during the upcoming sessions, we'll be taking a little bit of a different approach to what we've done in the past and focusing on creating a shared learning environment for all of our partners. Uh, my name is Peter, by the way, marketing manager here at EMHware. But our goal for these sessions is to foster a community that learns from each other since we all strive towards getting better outcomes for our clients. Today, I'm proud to introduce EMHware's president, Maria Prairie, who will be joined by Steve Vachon, the program director from Montfort Renaissance. Today, they'll be discussing how to analyze meaningful data to make impactful decisions in in organizations and how the use of integrated technologies can help move the needle in regards to access to care. Please put your questions into the chat or the Q&A and stick around till the end of the session where we'll be able to filter those questions through to Steve or Maria. And without any further ado, I'll pass it off to Maria and Steve.
Thank you so much, Peter, and welcome, Steve. I'm absolutely thrilled to be having this conversation today. For those of you who have joined, we will chat for about 40 minutes and then our goal is to leave 15 or 20 minutes at the end for questions. But Steve and I both could talk about this topic for a very, very long time. I think we're both passionate about it. So officially welcome, Steve. Before we kind of dive in the whole meat of things, why don't you take a couple of minutes and tell us about yourself?
Well, I'm Steve Vachon, as you now know. I work for Montfort Renaissance. Montfort Renaissance is located in Ottawa. It's a community-based organization, of about 160 employees, and we work from 10 functional centers. So we provide services in mental health, substance use health, housing, and services to seniors. For my part, I'm director of mental health programs and coordinated access here at Montfort Renaissance. And not now, but during the interview, I'll tell you a bit more about coordinated access because this is something that exploded in the past few years based on the step care model. And data collection analysis is fundamental about that. Personally, I have a background in psychoeducation. I've been teaching at university since '97. Now I teach about a course a semester. I'll have more more time to do that. I teach in the psychology and psychoeducation departments. I also have a bachelor's degree in mathematics and computer science. That's another life. But for the past 10, 12 years, I've been more on the management side. So I've been director since 2014 here at Montfort Renaissance. I've been working here since 2010. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, it's not surprising that you see the power that data can bring, given that you have a background in mathematics and in computer science and how to use systems and processes and products to be able to give you the data to enable the right kind of decisions and either provide better care or more efficient care. Tell us a little bit about a typical day in the life at Montfort Renaissance. Sorry, my French accent is not nearly as good as yours.
It'd be hard for me to describe a typical day because we have services that are 24/7. We have the Ottawa Withdrawal Management Center. So it's a community-based withdrawal management center, but level two, affiliated to a hospital. So of course, people will stay there for about 5 to 6 days during the acute withdrawal management phase, and then go on to services. We have residential stabilization for substance use health. So this is a longer stay in a residential setting to prepare individuals to benefit from residential treatment for substance use health. So we realize that many of them typically didn't complete addictions treatment programs because they needed to be stabilized first. They could not make it there. I'll tell you a bit more about we have seniors residence, we have daycare for seniors, and we have subsidized housing units. We also have a very nice 48 apartments building for people who have been 180 days, so 6 months and more, homeless. So they're part of a local prior treat for homelessness, and it's the city of Ottawa that refers the clients to us. So these are all very different settings. I'll tell you a bit more about mine. I think it'll be more relevant to what I want to talk about. So mental health programs we have here are based on the intensive case management model. So I'm not sure about the participants here if you know about what intensive case management is. I can tell a bit about
Yeah,
it.
please do share.
Yeah, so I'm working with for people with severe and persistent mental illness. So imagine, let's say, schizophrenia. Imagine someone that's 20 years old and have their first psychotic break, start having delusions, hallucinations, auditive, visual, tactile. Their functioning, daily functioning just gets shattered, and often the relationships with their environment, parental family, marital family, they go through a phase of hospitalization, and then they need to be treated using antipsychotic drugs, which have quite intense side effects. Less now, but still. And their functioning after the psychotic break will still remain affected. So depression, cognitive functioning that will be uh, decreased or slower. They won't have the same stamina. Many of them won't be able to go back to work. So you can imagine the life of these individuals is affected in all areas of functioning.
Mhm.
So we're talking about recovery, but recovery is not going back to the state they were before the psychotic break. Recovery is reestablishing a new balance where they're going to be able to get a certain quality of life and life satisfaction. So intensive case managers, what they do, usually a person will go out of the hospital, will have some support, but they'll get to a point where they can function in society in their own housing unit or so. But in order to do so, they'll need to have support and help in many areas of functioning. I'll give you a few examples. So housing, food, household maintenance, personal hygiene, daily activities, physical health, psychotic symptoms, psychological distress, personal safety, alcohol, drug use, social relationships, significant relationships, sexual lives. So you can imagine that many of those areas of functioning might be affected for each of these individuals in a certain fashion. So we need to have a very client-centered approach to help these folks. So an intensive case manager basically will meet with the person sometimes several times a week at first, and then it'll decrease. The idea here is to make a service plan where we'll help service coordination. So, for example, if the person needs help for their budget, or they need help for medication observance, they need help when they have a meeting with their psychiatrist or with their doctor, or they need help maintaining their housing, and so on and so forth. So an intensive case manager will have typically a caseload of 14 to 20 people that they will help on a weekly basis like that. The idea here is that eventually the person won't need intensive case management anymore. What we want to do here, to each of the areas of functioning where the person needs support, we want to teach the individual to identify when they need support and how to get it and where to get it. So we may reinforce the natural social network or the formal social network with services and help. When we get to the point where intensive case management, that level of care is not required anymore. And this is really important because intensive case management up to until 12 or 14 years ago, it was perceived like a life measure. So the idea was, if we are able to maintain the person in their environment and not go back to the hospital, repeatedly, it's worth it. But the thing is, with 100, one person in 100, on average having schizophrenia and other severe illness requiring case management, you can't maintain that. You can't. If you serve
Absolutely.
a person for life, there's no client turnover. And actually, there's 3 years wait time for case management here in Ottawa right now. So
Wow.
yeah, so we shifted the model a couple of years back, and that
Okay.
tie into what we did to achieve that. Where back then, 80% of the people approximately needed long-term case management and about 20% shorter term. Now we shifted on its head the model. So 20% will need longer term care and 80% less. But to achieve that, we needed to come up with a way to do it, with a better
Mm-hmm.
understanding of what was going on. So I remember a question that was asked to me in 2014 when I got this program. So the previous I was manager then. So the director says to me, "How do you assess the weight of a caseload?" You have two intensive case managers, let's say. One has 14 clients, the other one has 15 clients. But the one with 14 clients might be, working much harder because their clients need more support. So how do you measure that quantitatively? So that's a good question. So how do we do that? So I started looking in the literature to understand more about best practice guidelines for intensive case management. And then I started working with EMHware. So I started looking in the data, in the contacts, and I realized at one point that, if you add the number and the duration of direct contacts on a weekly basis for each individual, it's going to give you a good idea. But then, it can vary quite a bit. So I said, okay, we need a certain interval of time that would make it a bit more valid in terms of data. So we decided between 12 and 15 weeks. So we started doing the analysis. And with the literature, what the literature was saying is that if you have between 1 and 2 hours of direct contacts with an individual during a week's time, that's about what's required for, regular, okay, intensive case.
Mm-hmm.
If you have between 2 and 3 hours, it's a bit much. If you have 3 to 4 hours, it's quite a bit. And then more than that, you get to the point where you need another level of treatment, which is an active. So, but I went in the other direction also. So, well, if we have just 45 minutes a week, if you have just half an hour a week, how does that translate into the work of an intensive case manager? So I assigned values, in French we call that pondération. So under half an hour a week, it's a really low intensity. It's about the weight of half a client. If you go between zero point 0.5 and 1 hour a week, it's about 0.75 client, 3/4 of a client. Between 1 and 2 hours, one client. 2 to 3, 1.5. 3 to 4, two clients. And over that, three clients. So
Mm-hmm.
this way we started doing an analysis of the weight of the caseloads. First thing that it gave us is that you have an intensive case manager who's been working. We've been collecting data for the past year, and then he comes in supervision and says, "I can't see, I can't do it anymore. It's too
Too
intense,
much.
too much work." And then you check and say, "Well, for the past 2 years, your caseload has had the same weight. Can I help you with something? Is there something wrong? Is there something going on in your life why you're, more tired?" And so it starts giving you that quantitative aspect of the thing. But what we realized is that for some clients, for a 2 to 3 time interval, 6 to 9 months, they were at 0.5 client. Now you start questioning, does this person still require intensive case management? And if you asked the case manager, they would say, of course. If I wasn't there, it'd go back straight to the hospital. Are you sure
Mm-hmm.
about that? So, and that's when we started shifting the model, if you will, and saying, well, maybe not, because remember the old conception was they need us for life. So there was quite a bit of
Right.
reluctance from the staff and the clients as well. So we said, okay, no, we need to start doing something here. So we worked on a policy, which is transitioning to end of care. How we did that? We used the OCAM, So this is a module in EMHware. This is a functional assessment of needs. It's Ontario Common Assessment of Needs that we need to use with people who receive mental health support. You have 25 areas of functioning where you do an analysis, level of need and level of support. So using this, we determined the areas where the level of support was low and the level of need was high. So these became priorities. So we based our service plans to these areas of functioning were priority. For each of them, we identified, is there another support system or person in the environment that the individual could provide help? Can we teach the individual to determine when they need help and how to contact that person or that service? And then we have a service plan like that. So when you have an individual who's been at 0.5 hours a week for quite a while, sit down with them and said, you know what, you might be able to fly by yourself now.
Mm-hmm.
So we started slowly shifting the model like that. Of course, we had a safety net. So if at end of service, for a complete year afterwards, if your needs increase or you go through something, a crisis, you just come back. You don't have to do the queue for the wait list again. So we started installing this. It changed our way of doing things because now the first time you meet with the individual, you start the assessment process and you tell them, you know, our objective here is that you don't need me.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll work towards that. So that will be your achievement. In a position to, you know, I'm going to be there for the rest of your life. So,
Well, and it gives them a level of independence, which I think is
absolutely.
so critically important. And you know, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you went from 80% being lifelong forever to 20%.
Yeah,
So that enabled you as well to not only impactfully improve the quality of life and the independence of the person that is in the program, but as well to enable and see more people come through the process.
exactly. In the first 2 years, we transitioned 35 individuals to end of service. And only
Wow.
35 in the following year of their discharge, only 3 came back. One was for moving, one was for the loss of someone, and the other one, I'm not sure. But so it demonstrated that we were right. And now, you know, with I think that we're facing more complex clinical presentations with concurrent disorders, with substance use, with mental health. After the pandemic, people were isolated. There was an increase in drug use. There was an increase in mental. So we can't maintain that kind of service, especially if it's not necessary. And what we did with the data is that we demonstrated it. We didn't just say we have to change things. You know, it doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense. We demonstrated it with this. So it became a tool that we could use in clinical supervision, a tool that we could use in goal planning with our clientele. And they could see by themselves that it was in fact working. So this is the first time I had used, you know, data that would have a direct impact on our practice and on the quality of our services. And then I think we started realizing the power of using data and qualitative statistics to demonstrate something. So that's what we started with the caseload analysis.
Well, that is an incredible story, Steve. And you know, as you know, I'm pretty passionate about impactfully improving care, and ended up at EMHware because of my passion and wanting to actually to be able to influence this. You know, I spent quite a bit of time in clinical delivery, not specifically in mental health, but use data so that I could see more people and be more efficient. And I mean, you know, your demand has gone up significantly, but no one's standing on the street corner handing you lovely checks to say, oh, just continue to hire so that you can continue to see more and more people, right? You need to find a way to increase and decrease the amount of time to treatment efficacy, to getting them out of the day-to-day system so that you can be there to support when you need, which is so incredible in that story. And you did this in 2014, right? And this is not the only thing. I know you've got
Oh,
lots
no, no,
of
no. I
things
have
that you've
a
done
couple
within the
other examples.
organization.
Couple other examples you might like to hear. And you know what we're doing here, we're funded with public dollars. It's taxpayers' money. You want bang for your buck. And our
Yes.
business is to increase the quality of life. We need to use all the means at our disposition to do so. Now we're talking more and more about best practice guidelines, meaning that what you do needs to be based on scientific literature and experience, and be demonstrated as a good approach. Now, with the new Ontario Health Teams, we have the possibility to have a status which is called BPSO, Best Practice Spotlight Organization. That status is provided by the Registered Nurse Association of Ontario, the RNAO. They've been doing this implementing best practice for years in a whole bunch of countries, in South America. So they decided, okay, OHTs could have that status, but to do so, they need to enter in a formal agreement with several of the service providers that are under the umbrella of the OHT, and they need to implement 4 best practice guidelines and underlying practices in a period of 4 years. So Montfort said, yeah, sure, let's go. So one of those practices was person-centered care. And we said, well, that's in our DNA. How can we do that? How can we demonstrate that it's a good approach? So we decided to use a program that's called TeachBack. TeachBack is basically based on help relationship. It's a way to ensure that the information you provided to a client has been understood clearly so that they can make an enlightened choice about what's going on in their lives, self-determination. Someone that gets to the doctor and they just get a diagnosis that they're diabetic, and the doctor tells them, okay, you're going to take this kind of medication and you're going to change your food, your eating habits. And the person gets home and they didn't retain a quarter of what the doctor said. They stopped at the first sentence. So TeachBack is a way to, these are tools you give your staff to make sure that in certain important decisions, yes, I want this service. No, I don't want this. Yes, I want this treatment. So when you provide the information to the client, you want to make sure that they do understand. So what we did a case data, a form in EMHware, okay, where we would assess the satisfaction of the client in the interactions they have with the staff. So we calculated a baseline. In EMHware, we created a type of activity which was called TeachBack. Every time the staff would use that approach, they would enter a direct contact in EMHware. For this client was a TeachBack contact. So every 3 months, we would get the list of clients that did have contacts for TeachBack. And every 3 months, we would use these clients to compare their satisfaction to the baseline we have initially. Now, this data demonstrated that this approach increased satisfaction from clients towards the services they receive. So this data was then provided to the RNAO. They entered it in their database, EMHware database, to support the fact that this was a best practice. Now, although it's in our DNA, it's not always the case in the hospitals. Now, our OHT have the demonstration that this approach is worth implementing. So that's another example of what you can do with collecting data with our EHR, and the possibilities are embedded in it. So, and that's why I really like EMHware. I have to say,
well, we're very happy that you really like
I used many different systems, and probably the most versatile one would be EMHware, and the reporting capabilities are amazing. So that's another example of what we did implementing TeachBack.
Well, it is very interesting. Like you, I've used a number of EHRs. In the execution of clinical practice, sometimes we forget that we're tracking and counting things. And once we realize that, which obviously you have, and you've taken that message in other places and supported and helped other organizations under the OHT format to, look at what you guys have been doing and implement other things as well. But the power of the data just opens up so many avenues. How do you operate more efficiently? How do you look and distribute workload? How do you make sure that, your time to treatment efficacy is faster, time to getting them out of, that continuous contact, that continuous need for support is faster, decrease relapse, especially in complex care situations where you have, an addiction scenario and you have mental health that's supporting it, which is often the case, right? And so the other one as well is how do you collect data to enable the ministry to make decisions?
That's a good one. That's a very, very good one.
Right. And, I do want to talk and spend a little bit of time about talking about your service access to recovery program, because you actually used the data that you had to improve the program and look for more funding to do that. So can we spend a few minutes chatting through that?
Yes, yes, yes. So in 2012, we decided in the Champlain area to implement coordinated access to substance use health care. So coordinated access is not a centralized access where you have all the possibilities. It's really based on step care. So it involves an assessment based on a set of validated tools to have a clinical presentation that is clear and that you have a good understanding of the level of care that's required for the person. Then you need to have agreements with all the service providers to make coordinated access the default access mechanism for their services. It means that if a client would knock on their door, they would send them to the coordinated access. We proceed with the assessment, and then we refer maybe to a better suited level of care. Now, we decided that because, first of all, someone that is in dire straits and decides to have care will start knocking on every door. Usually default using the one that's there's the less wait time. Or often we'll say, oh, no, you're too sick for us. Or you're not sick enough for us. And they get sick of it and they don't get to care and they aggravate and they go to the emergency. We didn't have a good idea of the client flow in the region for substance use healthcare. We knew that the wait times were very high. And we knew that the services were not optimized. So often people would start 2-3 intake processes and end up not using one of the three. So we said, okay, coordinated access is the best way to have the proper level of care and optimize that the care that's available. So Montfort Renaissance had the responsibility of doing this. So we started as a pilot project in 2012. 2014, we decided that it was a good way to go, but there were much to be done still. So one thing that was obvious to me, we needed to exchange, very private information between the ones that do the assessment and the referral and the agency that would receive the service request. So I thought, we need to be able to send this electronically in a secure fashion. But a big problem is none of them were using the same EHR. So we had systems that didn't talk to each other. So then I started talking to EMHware and send a specification and they developed the waitlist module. Now the waitlist module is something that was spectacular. It would provide a secure access to other service providers onto our EHR, just the waitlist module. So let's say we assess the individual. We have the assessment reports attached in the client's file, dossier. And then we could send a service request directly to the agency. Now they would receive an email saying, you have a new service request from SAR. Then they would log on to EMHware, access the client demographics, the assessment report, a referral validation summary, and then they would determine, you know what, this is a good fit for our program. Then they would make a service offer at a certain date. And then when the client would physically start the services towards which they'd been referred, they would enter an admission date. If the client was not a good match, we created a drop-down menu with different reasons why, and then a text box to enter a bit more information why this client was not a good fit for the program. So this gave us the possibility first to have a very clear understanding of the average wait times to get an answer, average wait time to get into treatment. We also had a very clear profile of people that typically got rejected from all the service requests we were making. We started getting very detailed data for each of the agencies, their wait times, the number of referrals, the number of clients they accepted, the numbers they rejected, and so on and so forth. And for transparency, we were distributing this report to all the service providers that were in agreement with us. There were 20 service providers. We started a data analysis. So for substance use health, men are overrepresented, especially for alcohol. So we had about 30% women and 70% men. It was around that. But what we realized is that the ratio of women that we were sending outside Champlain to get treatment was 8% higher. So we started looking into the clinical presentation for these women. We realized it was often personality disorder, eating disorders. They were using benzos like lorazepam or Valium for an anxiety condition, but it was a barrier to accessing treatment. So after a while, we decided, you know what, that doesn't work. We have to send a woman outside Champlain, and then we need to make, her timing correspond when she comes back to treatment. And it was just too complicated. So we went to Dylan and said, we need residential stabilization for women. We need a place where they're going to be able to stay up to 3 months to learn to live in accordance with a schedule. Learn to function in groups. And when it's tough, they can, exit the group and then have some counseling. And after a while, when we determine that they're stabilized enough, then they can really benefit from treatment. So we finally got the funding. So we had a 10-bed residential stabilization for women. And clearly enough, 4 or 5 years after, we had one for men as well.
Wow.
We realized also that the suitability of the women we would refer to residential treatment here in Champlain increased dramatically. Our partners were telling us so. So that's an example of using data to influence funding policies, because then you have a clear understanding of the real service gaps and the importance of this gap. Is it worth it?
And the need, which I think is really critical. And certainly with the other partners that we talk with, there's a lot of conversation around how can you help us to show what this situation is and where the gaps are, and then help us build the data set so that we can actually go to the ministry and ask for additional funds or make the case for additional support. That's an incredibly impactful story. And I think it also led to your involvement in Access MHA and that initiative. Now, I know we don't want to spend a huge amount of time there, but can you give us a little bit of a nugget on what that is and kind of the transition from the work that you did on your SARS program and how that now has enabled thinking in a much broader way around access to care and coordination around that?
Yeah, well, it was clear that coordinated access was the way to go. But we wanted to have it not only for substance use health, but also for mental health, because these are, so closely related. So we were sitting on consultation tables and working on it. And eventually in 2018, the Royal Ottawa Healthcare Group got some funding from Ontario Structured Psychotherapy to come up with a model that would work for mental health and addictions coordinated access. Of course, doing what we were doing, we were sitting on the oversight committee, and we worked very closely with them. By 2019, SAR was considered a best practice by Accreditation Canada. So we were taken seriously, even though we were a community organization. We were playing with the hospitals and the whole thing. So by 2019, we had a model. Then by 2020, we had an implementation plan. We formed 3 groups, a group of service providers, a group of primary care practitioners, and a group of people with lived experience. We call them people with lived expertise. So chairs of each of these groups were sitting on an oversight committee, and we worked on an implementation plan. We thought it'd take 4 or 5 years to implement. That's a big thing. We're talking about, all clinical presentations for adults, mental health and addictions. That's 20% of the population in their lifespan will have one of these problems. In our area, it's 200,000 people. That's lots of people. But then the pandemic hit, became abundantly clear that we needed to connect people to care. Now the government started, spending money to do something about the pandemic, and they sent us one-time funding. So we came up with an IT infrastructure to build our project with a training program for the people that would do the assessments and then connect the people to treatment. We developed a community of practice, and then we started onboarding service providers, partners that would want to be connected onto Access MHA. By then, it was Regional Coordinated Access. We branded it Access MHA. And then we launched. So initially, people would self-refer. So they would get on the system and then answer questions, demographics and stuff, and then select when they wanted to be assessed. The information specialist would call the person and then connect them directly to treatment. And we have primary care providers using Ocean that could refer their patients directly into the system. We launched February 24th, 2021. Since then, we assessed and referred 21,000 people.
Wow.
Now we refer just in our area to 113 different programs, hospital-based, community-based, mental health addictions, Ontario structured psychotherapy and whatnot. Before the holidays, we launched in Southeast because the model has been recognized by the Center of Excellence in mental health and addictions as a best practice. Is considered by Ontario Health as a best practice. So it's now in implementation in Southeast, and in the spring, we're going to implement in Central East as well. So all Eastern Ontario will be served by Access MHA. We still collect data, tons of it, and now we have a sample that's so huge that the interpretation of the data becomes extremely valid. So imagine the impacts on funding policies, implementation guidelines, best practice guidelines. It's quite amazing. So we're using green space as a measurement-based cared of, to exchange information, and Ocean for the primary care providers. In Southeast, most service providers, community-based, are using EMHware. So now we're working at connecting green space, Ocean, green space, cared of, and EMHware together to facilitate data exchange and stop the double entry. Our staff spend so much time on administrative duties where they could be working with their clients. We need to optimize that as well, and interoperability is the way to go.
Well, and I think it's not just the way of the future, it's the only way forward. And I think that's super important. I mean, we've spent so much time and energy in recent years building connections with CareDove and Ocean and a partnership with Green Space so that Green Space doesn't require double entry and the such, right? How do we make it easier for people to do the work of actually helping the people that need help, right? That's really the whole mandate and the reason for EMHware being in place in the first place, started by a clinician to do those things. I'm just looking at the time. We've got about 20 minutes left. So, and I do want to give us a little bit of time for questions because you and we could talk about this forever. Thank you for sharing, really just a few nuggets of the things that you have done. It's really impressive how creative and innovative your organization and the region has been in how you really work to provide better, more impactful care. So